Thank you very much. In politics, you sometimes are commanded to do things, sometimes you are called upon to do things. This is an activity that I have been looking forward to with great enthusiasm, and I want to thank Lou Frey, who I first met during the 1978 gubernatorial campaign. I'm afraid I was 10 years later than when you first met Governor Bush. But I wanted to also, Lou, thank you for the wonderful career you have had after your career in public service. I've been impressed today with how many young people, students at this university and high school students are here today. Frankly, there has been a distressing decline in civic participation in this country, particularly among young people. The fact that so many of you are here today and ask such good questions, some of which were on the subject and some which were not quite on the subject, to Governor Bush is an indication of your commitment to fulfill the role of citizen in our American democracy. I also want to thank my good friend Jim for that generous introduction. Jim and I, as he says, have known each other. I don't think it's been for quite 50 years. I hate to say it, Jim, it's been more like 52 or 3 years. Jim has been a very generous supporter of a program that is going to start next year. And Lou, I don't want to make a pitch for what I hope will be a very congenial ally of yours and your objectives, but a center is going to be established at the University of Florida and the University of Miami. Jim has made a very generous contribution to a beautiful building which that program will be housed. So our friendship continues. I was distressed to hear the news that my good friend and colleague Wayne Mixon had been involved in an automobile accident. I regret to say I was unaware of that until it was announced, and I extend my best wishes to Wayne and to Margie and hopes for his quick and full recovery. I also want to thank President Hitt for the leadership that he has provided to this institution with the great achievement of last week, the designation of a medical school for the University of Central Florida being the latest of his contributions. If I could tell a little story, and you'll have a chance later today to question the veracity of this story, but I was elected to the legislature in 1966, and through a series of unusual circumstances, ended up being the chairman of the House Subcommittee of Appropriations for the state universities. At that time, there were 4 universities in Florida. There were the 3 historic universities, University of Florida, FSU, and Florida A&M, and the University of South Florida had just recently come online. One of my goals as chairman of that subcommittee was to see that there were adequate funds for universities like this to complete their initial planning and be ready to start to receive students. We'd passed a bill twice through the legislature to provide that initial planning. Both of them had been vetoed by then Governor Claude Kirk, who basically felt we had enough universities in Florida. I felt that the governor just didn't quite understand what the demands were going to be, and so I went to his office and I asked if I could get an appointment, and his secretary gave me an appointment for July 26th at 9 o'clock. This is 1967. So as fate would have it, on July 25th at night, my wife delivered our 3rd daughter. So I arrived somewhat disheveled with cigars in hand, and I gave them to Governor Kirk, and he said, Mr. Graham, congratulations on the birth of your daughter. what are you going to call your daughter? And I said, we're going to call her Arva Suzanne. He said, very interesting. What is the derivation of those names? And I said, she's named for two of our longtime family friends. Pause. Mr. Graham, you have committed grievous error. You should have named your daughter Claudia, because you and all of Florida have no better friend than Claude Kirk. Jeez. 2 days later, he vetoed our bill for the third time. Governor Bush talked about some of the principles that he has developed in his public responsibilities. I have chosen the same word, but in a somewhat more focused context. What are some of the principles that I learned as it relates to effective governorship? And I also have 3 more than Governor Bush had, so I'm going to unload 8 of these principles on you this morning. The first is to understand the environment. Florida is unique. Ideas that may have proven successful in Wisconsin can't automatically be transported to the special circumstances of Florida. That's one of the reasons that I encourage students to study Florida history if you're interested in being involved in public leadership in Florida. If you don't know how we got to be what we are today, the fact that, for instance, our state university system for over a century of Florida statehood was largely confined to 3 institutions in the north central area of the state, says a lot about what kind of state Florida was and what it has become in the lifetime of many people in this audience. Second, I understood that we were in the late 1970s in the first stages of what became a oil crisis-driven mini recession, and therefore there was going to be a sharp focus on the economic future of our state. And shortly thereafter, when President Reagan was inaugurated and made his initial speech talking about the federal government turning more responsibilities back to the states, that we as a state needed to start getting prepared for that greater responsibility that we were going to receive. So understanding the broad environment in which you're operating is a first principle for effective leadership. Second is to see the campaign as part of your ability to effectively govern. Governor Bush emphasized the importance of candor in the campaign so that when you did things in office, the people didn't feel as if you had engaged in some bait and switch or other deceptive activity. I see the campaign as being in part a contract signing process between the people and the candidate, both listening carefully to what the other is saying and indicating with precision what you are going to do if you receive their confidence. Another important part of the campaign is building that indispensable relationship with your family. This is not something that one person does. It is something which is a very much of a family partnership. When it was first talked about that I was going to run for governor in 1977, my then 12-year-old daughter went to her mother and said, "Mother, I don't want Daddy to run for governor. I like my home. I like my friends. I like my school. I don't want to move to Tallahassee." To which her mother said, "Sissy, don't be worried. There's no chance that your father is going to get elected." Third principle is to select competent personnel. in a state as big as Florida and as complex as Florida, no one or a single set of people can provide effective leadership. I believe that from the top, the leadership needs to be, one, a clear enunciation of the goals. Anybody that I appointed, for instance, to the Board of Regents at that time, understood that there were some principles that we wanted to achieve in higher education, one of which being to see that these new set of universities were able to reach their full potential. Second is, what are the standards by which you're going to be judged in the conduct of your office? Clear accountability, and then decentralization of decision-making. If you've appointed someone, for instance, to be a member of the St. John's Water Management District, and then you or someone on your staff in Tallahassee thinks that they know more about the day-to-day decisions that that district makes, frankly, you've appointed the wrong person to be on that district board. You need to appoint people with competence and then let them, within the goals that you've established, function. The most significant aspect of this was in the judiciary. I met in the period between election and inauguration several times with Governor Collins, who was one of my heroes in American politics. And he told me that the single most important thing in his judgment that a governor did was appoint judges, because judges tended to have tenures that outran your tenure, and that they set a tone of ethics and standards for the communities in which they served. In order to help fulfill Governor Collins' admonition, we had a system of every 6 months inviting a distinguished private attorney to come in to be our special counsel, with one of their principal responsibilities being to assist us in locating those people who would meet the Governor Collins standard of appointment to the judiciary. Fourth principle is to set priorities and then prioritize your priorities. A criticism I would make of our first couple of years in Tallahassee is we had too many ideas. I thought most of them were pretty good ideas, but there were too many of them. I describe this as being like my family. I have 11 grandchildren. I love all 11, but at some point in time, you've got to say the boat won't get to the destination carrying all of them. You have to decide what your priorities are. Thank God I've never had to make that decision about my 11 grandchildren, but in the governor's office, we set our priorities as what we called the 3 E's, which we talked about in the campaign. And those E's were economic development, education, and the environment, which I think are the triangle that is the most significant to the future of Florida. Wayne Mixson was lieutenant governor, and he took on the job of being our czar for economic development. And I'll say some things later which I think indicate the quality of the job that he did. Next is to establish quantifiable goals. There's a tendency in politics to want to use adjectives instead of numbers to describe what your goals are. I believe that it's important to have some measurements, particularly measurements that are external to your control as an evaluation. The University of Florida basketball team got a good evaluation last night. We'd agree with that, wouldn't we, Jim? Yeah, and that was an external validation in their victory over Villanova. To pick the first area of the economy, we were evaluated first by external groups who looked at Florida in the context of the other 49 states. And during the 8 years that Wayne was leading our economic development program, 3 times by that national standard, Florida was ranked as the state with the #1 environment for economic development. That showed itself in the fact that we had a very low rate of unemployment. Governor Bush has gotten it down to 3%. I don't think we were ever quite that successful because we had to deal with people like Dick Batchelor in the legislature, who was a constant source of criticism and objection. But one goal that I was particularly interested in, throughout its history, Florida had never reached the national average in per capita income. When I became governor, we were about 97 or 98% of the national average. In order to get to the national average, you had to bring in enough, not only a quantitatively sufficient number of new jobs, but qualitatively they had to pay a salary that was sufficient to bring the overall average up to or above 100%. And one of the proudest moments of my governorship was when the statistics were announced for 1985, and Florida was 101% of the national average in per capita income. We had been able to bring approximately 1.2 million jobs to Florida, and those 1-2 million new jobs had put us where our goal had been. Next principle is to use all the levers of power against the goals that you want to do. Yes, you're trying to work with the legislature to carry out both the substantive legislation and the appropriations and the tax policy necessary to achieve your goal. You want to work with your own agencies in terms of achieving that goal, and to use the bully pulpit of the governorship to bring the public support behind your goals. The governor's office is very much of a deductive process. You can set where you want to go, look at the means by which you can get there, and try to orchestrate them towards a common purpose. In contrast to the United States Senate and most other legislative bodies, which are very inductive, that is, you're constantly dealing with the bullets that are coming in at you from your constituents and elsewhere with their own set of priorities, and as a representative of those of the people, their priorities have a tendency, appropriately, to become your priority. 7 is to be ready for surprises. This is another difference between the governorship and the U.S. Senate. As a U.S. Senator, you have absolutely no control over your day-to-day schedule. I'm certain Congressman Keller will agree with this. Other people, such as the leadership of the Congress or the chairman of the committees on which you serve, they set what your day-to-day schedule is. On the other hand, you can be pretty sure that in August you are not going to be in Washington, and you can be pretty sure that between sometime in early December until sometime in late January, you aren't going to be in Washington. Those are the non-session times. As governor, it's just the opposite. You had almost complete control over your day-to-day schedule. You had no control over your yearly schedule because you were always subject to some crisis that might interrupt whatever plans that you'd had before. The first crisis that I encountered, I was doing a workday as a bailiff at the juvenile court in Dade County, and I got a call that a tank car of ammonia had turned off the railroad tracks in Crestview, Florida, and was putting the community at risk. I thought I knew a lot about what it was like to be governor. I didn't know anything about what you do about an ammonia car that's 800 miles away in Crestview. I learned one of the things you do is you call out the National Guard to create a perimeter around the tank car to restrict its danger to the population. We dealt with a series of crises. We had a gas strike from Port Everglades and Fort Lauderdale, which effectively shut off the flow of gasoline to about 40% of the population of the state. We had the Mariel boat lift, where 150,000 refugees came in the state over a period of less than 8 weeks. We had riots that were a result of the Mariel boat lift. We had a cargo ship hit the Sunshine Skyway Bridge, the largest bridge in Florida, and every fall a few hurricanes to deal with. Those are the kinds of things that you can expect in a dynamic state like Florida, but each one has its own set of surprises. And finally, an eighth of my principles is to stay close to the people. Among other things, I tried to do it by continuing a program that I'd commenced while I was in the legislature of taking different jobs on a monthly basis, going out into the state and working with Floridians. I found that there was no better way to find out what was on the minds of the people that you were trying to represent. You got an enormous number of new ideas that you could bring back to Tallahassee, and frankly, it was the most fun of almost any aspect of the job. You also need to respect people. One of the things that we did, and this may be heresy to admit, but it happens to be the record, is we raised taxes several times while I was governor. And Dick probably voted for those taxes. Explain them. And the process that we used, which I hope was a respectful process, was to start by asking the question, what do the people of Florida want? What are their expectations? For instance, we had a spike in crime in the early 80s, in large part because of the Mariel boat lift. And so people wanted a greater investment in their security. That meant more police on the streets. That meant more prosecutors. It meant more highway patrol personnel, etc. We tried to quantify that. If you want to have 50 more police in the city of Orlando, what is that going to cost? And what is that going to cost in the downstream things, the more prosecutors and judges that will be required to try the cases? And then we quantified that into a dollar number. And we went to the people and said, if you want to have 50 more police in Orlando and what that means across the state, here's what it's going to cost, and here's the way that I think we should best pay for it. Well, people then had to decide, were they really serious about wanting 50 more police in Orlando? And if so, was it worth paying some additional sales tax or whatever tax was being suggested? And we found in the vast majority of cases that if people bought in to the solution to a problem that they felt that they were mature enough, that they understood that somebody had to pay for it, and that as the taxpayers of Florida, they were that somebody. I think treating people respectfully and respecting their basic intelligence is an important part of being an effective governor. So friends, those are a few lessons of experience. I share what Governor Bush said in his conclusion. This is a wonderful opportunity to serve as the governor of this very wonderful, special state. It's a constant set of challenges, but because of the nature of Floridians, there are solutions for most of those challenges. I want to thank you for your contribution to our state, and I particularly want to thank the young people who are going to be stepping up and taking their roles as the leaders of this state, and their commitment to being a good citizen and a leader in this great democracy of America. Thank you very much. Thank you.
So my observations is in 1966, when he was elected to the Senate, I graduated from high school. That was during the year of Governor Kirk, you might recall, which resulted in the first teacher strike in the history of the state of Florida. So, but I left there, and to show you that I didn't learn much in high school, I volunteered for the Marines and spent a year in Vietnam, but came back and attended Valencia and then graduated from this fine university here. I always tell Dr. Hitt publicly, I say that I attended the university and graduated. I never said I was educated at the university, because I do not want to offend the hard-earned credibility of this fine institution. But I did attend here, and the only thing I wish Graham had focused on more was parking. It is quite amazing, Governor, coming out here, having been a student, and come out here on a fairly regular basis for class activities and other campus activities, and see the incredible growth here. I think for every new building, John Hitt dropped 10 pounds. So I think it was a worthy goal. It was working. Congratulations on the arena and also the med school also. I did make an observation that Congressman Keller, sitting on the front row, has taken copious notes. Lou left, which is what he usually does when it's time for me to debate him on NPR. But he will make just as much of a contribution in his absence as he does when he's there. But, well, that's what he gets for leaving. But then at his age and a cup of coffee, I understand, he'll be back in a minute. But Congressman Keller has taken so many notes, I think I could predict on the next NPR show that I think he's learned so much today and he's gained such wisdom, he's prepared to switch parties. And but that will be announced later, Rick, if you don't mind. There goes my last visit to his office. But I want to congratulate Congressman Frey. He's done a terrific job with this institute. It is really great. It was announced rather subtly that Jim Pugh has made a significant contribution for a institute and a building at the University of Florida, which will probably get Lou Frey asking everybody else that's close to him, can we now build him a building? But the man lives near Windsong and Winter Park. He doesn't need another building. He's doing very well there. Let me just say 2 or 3 things about Bob Graham. I had the pleasure of serving 4 years under Governor Reuben Askew, and then 4 years in the legislature under Governor Bob Graham. So when my firstborn, I named Reuben Bobby, and passed a lot of legislation. I didn't have any children when I was in the legislature, but Adele, his wife, is truly someone really loves. If you dealt with Adele, she's just terrific, and I can remember being invited over to the mansion. Bobby might remember this, and briefing the First Lady on aging issues, because that was one of her old passions, and she really would then come testify before the Select Committee on Aging, which I chaired at the age of 29. But now I need those services, so it's come full circle. But Adele was such a great spokesperson for whatever issue she was involved in, and she was truly a magnificent First Lady and has done a great deal of things. The one thing that Governor Graham spared you today was, if you've ever heard him sing, and I'm not encouraging it, Governor, I know that you like to, but I was in Washington with him one day lobbying on something, and we stepped off the street corner, and he's singing a Janis Joplin song, which was audible, not recognizable, and probably Janis would not have recognized it either, but he has a tremendous sense of humor. He's very, very bright. He was terrific to work with as a member of the legislature, because frankly in the legislative process, and everyone knows this, it's in the process, you have to find people in the process who you trust, who you value their input, their education, their intelligence, because you can't be an expert in all of these issues, and Rick, you will certainly agree with that in your congressional days too. You have to find people that you trust, whether it's the constitutional issues, the criminal justice issues, and Bob Graham was one of those people that I singled out when I first was there as a freshman to really, actually my 4th year there, to really understand things. If it was environmental issues, Senator Bob Graham, state senator at the time. I was in the House with him first. If it was education, it was Bob Graham. There are only 3 people in the state who understand there's a FEFP, which is a funding formula for K through 12 education. I think the only 4 people who knew what it meant was Buddy McKay, Bob Graham, Ralph Turlington, and Marshall Harris. But none of them could explain it well enough for their colleagues, because when you left, the bell curve really got skewed, Bob. I want you to know that. But he has been a terrific advocate. If the Everglades, there's so much history with Bob Graham. If you go back on the environmental issues, the water management districts, the Everglades, say about Everglades as governor, taking the lead position, the United States Senator taking the lead to get the funding to rebuild the Everglades and protect that great crown jewel of the state. He's done a very terrific job in all those areas. I really enjoyed working with him because he was a sponsor of things like efforts to keep older people out of institutions unnecessarily. Nursing home reform, ACLF reform, congregate meal sites, adult daycare, services that would lend support to an older person so they could stay in their home as long as possible. Community care for the elderly was a big issue of his. He used to call it the Graham-Batchelor bill in Miami. In Orlando, I refer to it as the Batchelor-Graham bill. But no matter the issue, and then as United States Senator, I was always very, very proud of not only his intellectual contributions to that process, but the leadership he took on so many issues. And to be not only having a position, it's easy for an elected official to have a position. We used to have several, but an informed, enlightened, defensible position. And that's really what differentiates people like Bob Graham for other members, in my opinion, of the United States Senate and some governors around the country, that he really does know what he's talking about. Finally, I'll say that he takes copious notes, not unlike Rick. One day I went to meet with him as governor about a piece of legislation I was trying to move, and as I was sitting across from his desk, he's of course sitting in the governor's seat, and he's taking a couple of notes, and I opened up my pad. And as he talked, I didn't write any notes intentionally, and then as I would talk, he would write notes, and finally he looked over and said, "You're not writing anything down." I said, "Well, you haven't said anything worth writing down yet, because you haven't committed to support my piece of legislation, because the last thing you want is the governor, who has the veto power, not to support it." But let me just say, I want to pose a couple of questions to Governor Graham, and then yield to the audience, because again, I want you to have the great opportunity to talk to someone who is a wonderful state senator, a great governor for 2 terms, a great United States senator, and a candidate for president, if you recall also. So he has a lot of knowledge. The couple of things that occurred to me, the governor, is in the education arena. You were so supportive. In fact, I think I voted for a tax every year while you were governor, and then come home and tried to explain those. In support of education, in K through 12 education, of course, now most of the debate seems to be around not the funding necessarily, but the whole testing modality, whether it's FCAT or any other standardized test. I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, is testing becoming the issue of prominence, or should it be more funding? If you were reflecting on all of your years, K through 12 education, could you share a couple of comments from a learned perspective regarding the whole intent now to place so much issue of primacy on testing? Please.
As Governor Bush said, I don't think those are mutually exclusive questions. I believe that the public has a right to expect high standards and a rational means by which it is determined whether those standards are being met. And if those are being met, there's a public willingness to support financially what it's taken to achieve those high standards. In terms of testing, I think Buddy McKay, when he was in the legislature, was one of the first people who developed a comprehensive accountability system for Florida. I think most people who are concerned about education support the idea of accountability. The questions I have are, can you properly test an activity that is as complex as transferring knowledge from one generation to the next on a single test. I personally doubt that that is possible. I think there needs to be a more comprehensive set of methods that are used to evaluate. Second, how do you avoid the teaching becoming a captive of the testing? One of the reasons I think there has been a decline in civic education is that it is not on the test. It's not on the FCAT test, it's not on the SAT test, it's not on the ACT test. So if you produce a group of civically ignorant students, that's never going to be picked up. I think there are important dimensions to education that are more difficult to quantify. Art education is more difficult to quantify, civic education, but they are important in the development of young people. And third, I think there's a tendency to think that if there is low performance, that it must be because something bad or ineffective has happened in the classroom. My own sense is that you have to look at the classroom and the community that surrounds the classroom to find out where the answers are to low performance. I will share a story. I did one of my work days at a high school that was purposefully selected because it had 3 straight years of F. That high school was Chattahoochee High School in West Gadsden County. In the course of my time at that school, it was told to me that one of the reasons that they had low performance, buddy, was because they had a lot of absenteeism. And they had a lot of absenteeism because they had a lot of sickness among their students. And they had a lot of sickness among their students because there wasn't any effective health care system in Chattahoochee, Florida. There wasn't a private doctor, or at least there wasn't a private doctor that these children's family could have afforded, and the public health system didn't have a presence in Chattahoochee. So is the solution to low performance in the Chattahoochee High School to look exclusively at what happens inside the classroom? Or wouldn't it be rational to say, we also, in addition to the classroom, we got to deal with this health problem that we've got, such as getting the Gadsden County Public Health Department to put a clinic in Chattahoochee High School so the kids will have an incentive to go to school and will have some means of getting their illnesses dealt with. So I support accountability. I think it's an important but complex issue in terms of what goes into student performance and the method by which performance is assessed.
I really liked your comments on education, testing, education, social welfare, things that are very important to me. Just based on what you know and everything, I'd just like to hear some comments on like the Department of Children's and Family and other social service agencies and their status. They've been having a lot of problems, and I think you talked about funding and money. I think a lot of the problems there are underfunding, low staff, and I think it's hard to get good people to work in those agencies when there's very low funding. It's not very attractive, and I'd just like to hear if you have any comments on that.
I would make 2 comments. First, I think that any agency's competence begins at the top, that the leader sets the standard that the other members of the organization use as their benchmark. So it's important to have quality and sustained leadership. Second, on the specific issue of staff patterns, I mentioned the example of in the early 80s, crime in Florida. We found out one thing was that our probation and parole officers who were supposed to be monitoring those persons who had already had some intervention with the criminal justice system, that they be sufficiently staffed that you didn't give them an impossible caseload. And we put a lot of our resources into lowering that caseload, and I think we saw fairly quick response. I believe that an adequate caseload in the area of juvenile justice would have a similar result.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Hi. I like Florida, and everywhere I
That's a
look
good way to start.
Yeah. Everywhere I look, is Florida's in trouble. You know, we've been the 2000 elections. Florida's named, you know, Terry Schiavo, Florida again. Which is the biggest problem you think the next governor is going to face, other than the traffic?
I mean, I think it's the biggest problem that every governor, at least since the end of World War II, has faced, and that is dealing with the consequences of growth, of which traffic is one. Providing adequate education for a student population that is constantly expanding. Protecting our environment so that the very thing that has most contributed to people coming to Florida, and I've just spent the winter in Boston, and I'll tell you there were lots of times when I would have liked to have come to Florida, that we maintain this wonderful quality environment. That has been, and for the foreseeable future, will be the principal challenge. Yes, sir.
Governor, I've followed you for many years, and I've been an admirer of your leadership. Since your time in office, we've seen some low voter turnout, Governor, especially among young people, although I'm impressed with the turnout today. Do you think part of it is that perhaps we need stronger ordinances on the county level and perhaps on the state level in regards to ethics among elected public officials, especially in the area of conflict of interests, that they disclose that, and that's part of the reason that voters are unhappy with what is happening with public officials?
Yes, I think the public attitude towards the basic honesty and credibility of elected officials is a factor. But I think there's even a greater factor, and that is that many young people have come to the conclusion that it doesn't make any difference what happens in their civic life, and they have essentially opted out. This is not limited to younger people, but it happens to be particularly concentrated there. And I think that this goes back to the fact that most high school students in Florida can get their degree without having taken one course in civics in their last 4 years of education. We are doing a very poor job of educating young people as to what it means to be a citizen in a democracy. Yes, it means voting, but it means also being involved with the quality of the schools that your children will attend, the quality of the environment in which those children will be raised, and a whole array of issues that aren't going to get better unless there's active civic participation.
Very good, thank you.
Yes.
Hi, I'm Nicole from Odyssey Middle School.
Yes.
I understand that you said we place first in economic results. Do you think we'll be able to maintain that?
I'm sorry, say that again.
Economic results?
And do I think we can maintain that?
Yes.
I think we can, but to do so is going to take an investment in those other two E's. I just got through talking about how important protection of the environment is, not only to individual Floridians and the quality of our life, but it is also a fundamental reason why a company that is making a judgment as to whether to locate in this state or some alternative, or to expand in Florida or other alternatives, will make the decision to do so in Florida. But the most fundamental element of economic development is what you are now participating in, which is a quality education. We need to, it's not a surprise that the areas of the country that have had the greatest economic growth in the last couple of generations have been those that are associated with very superior education systems. And the commitment that we need to make is to make Florida one of those centers of educational superiority, and economic and other benefits will flow from that. Yes?
Can you explain why you supported and approved the 1984 Wetlands Protection Act?
Well, part of Florida's environment is the fact that we are a tropical climate. We have extensive wetlands. Those are as much of a signature of Florida as the Rocky Mountains are of Colorado. And they also are a critical part of fresh water, the quality of our water, the recreational opportunities for our people, as those mountains are in the West. And so we have a special interest and obligation to try to protect our wetlands, of which the greatest and the best known are America's Everglades that happen to be located in Florida. That's why there's been such a priority given on restoring and protecting the Everglades.
When you used to have your work days, which was your favorite and which was the hardest one?
I have 11 grandchildren, as I mentioned earlier, and if you ask me which is my favorite, which I'd like to spend the most time with, I wouldn't answer that question. So I'm reluctant to answer the first part of the question. I'll tell you what, the second part, and it wasn't very far from here, I did a work day at a center in Orange County for multiply handicapped children. It was the only job, not because of its physical demands, but the emotional demands, that I questioned whether I could finish. I happened to have had children at that stage in my life that were not much different in age from the children in this center. And the challenge of motivating and educating those children was overwhelming. And I came away from that with enormous admiration for the teachers who every day commit their full soul and intellect to motivating those young children. That was the most difficult and challenging job that I had. One more question? Yes. Whichever of you two ladies, or if you'd like to do a duet. And as Dick said, I like to sing, and I'll be glad to join. Plant a radish, get a radish, not a Brussels sprout. That's why I love vegetables. You know what you're about. That's all.
We were just wondering, what was the most memorable experience that you had since you were governor?
Boy, that's a tough question. There's such a flood of memories. Just to mention one was the feeling of great satisfaction that I had on a warm August day with Marjorie Stoneman Douglas when we stood beside the banks of the original riverbed of the Kissimmee River, a river that had been channelized, causing great wetlands destruction, and which we were experimenting with the possibility of, can you recapture a river which had been dead for 20 years? And the answer is, in Florida, yes. And we planted a cypress tree on the banks of the Kissimmee River, which was now filled with fresh, clean water, and was the signal that our efforts to maintain our wetlands and restore damaged wetlands could be realized.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Governor.
Dick?